Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective here, your Christian nerd bringing you analysis, reviews, and fun. In this video, I wanted to do some comparisons of the New King James Version and the New American Standard Bible. So the reason I wanted to do a comparison of these two translations in this video is because I know a lot of people who watch my channel like both of these translations. Some of you really like the New King James Version, some of you like the New American Standard Bible a lot, perhaps some of you like both a lot. So I thought it would be interesting to look at these two. Now this is not going to be a real comprehensive look at both of these. I just want to show you several examples here of how they're different. But one thing I want to point out in showing these examples, it's something that I personally feel, and not everybody would necessarily agree with this, but I really like the sound of the New King James Version over the NASB. But I think that the NASB sometimes is more technically correct. So to me, it kind of shows how these two translations have maybe potentially different uses. The New King James Version to me is better for reading out loud and just the way that it sounds. It's very beautiful because it's reflective of the King James Version from which it's derived. But the New American Standard Bible to me is great for personal study because it's so technically accurate and it says things in ways that I think are unique and really get you to think. So let's look at that here. The first example that I have is Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3. On the left, I have the New King James Version, and it says, "You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you." The New American Standard Bible reads, "The steadfast of mind you will keep in perfect peace, because he trusts in you." Now, I don't know which of those you like better, but as I look at these, I notice that the New King James Version does have a lot of italics here, which means that this phrase here, "whose mind is stayed on you," has a lot of supplied words in English. So maybe the New American Standard here is a little bit more straightforward from the Hebrew. "The steadfast of mind you will keep in perfect peace." But I love the wording of this. This is very traditional from the King James. Essentially, "You will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you." And so when I look at those two, I think the New King James Version, just aesthetically, the way it sounds is more pleasing to my ear. But the New American Standard Bible, I guess, is really technically correct there in the way that it words it. Although steadfast of mind to me is not necessarily clear to English readers, as opposed to "whose mind is stayed on you." I think we get a better sense of someone who it's about their faith, their trust in God. I'm not saying the New American Standard is bad there, but I just like the wording of the New King James Version a lot. Let's look at another example. In Psalm 139, verse 3, in the New King James Version, it says, "You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways." The New American Standard over here says, "You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways." So that's interesting. Again, maybe the New American Standard there is more technically correct. I think that, again, the New King James Version sounds a little bit more pleasing to my ear when I compare those two. However, I'm not sure comprehend is really the best word there. Scrutinize might technically be better. I think other translations use other wording that, to me, maybe are more technically correct and sound better than scrutinize. Scrutinize is just not my favorite word to use in the way that it sounds. Now, are aesthetics the most important thing? No, but the point I'm making here is that I think generally the New King James just has a better sound, while the New American Standard is more technically correct in certain ways. Let's look at another example. In Psalm 38, verse 8, the New King James Version says, "I am feeble and severely broken. I groan because of the turmoil of my heart." In the New American Standard, it says, "I am benumbed and badly crushed. I groan because of the agitation of my heart." Now, I don't know if all of you agree with what I'm saying here. In this instance, in the New American Standard, it talks about being benumbed and badly crushed. And that's just really interesting phrasing. I'm not really familiar with the word benumbed. I looked it up, and I understand what it means now. But it's just not a word that I hear very much. Now, that's not a bad thing, but that really strikes me. It's just unusual wording, I guess you would say, at least to me. Maybe you totally disagree with that. Whereas in the New King James Version, it's very clear, I am feeble and severely broken. I groan because of the turmoil of my heart. So really, that's just a preference thing, and I'm not sure that I could say really one is better than the other, but I just thought the New American Standard there just had a little bit of wording that to me sticks out, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I'd like to hear what you think about that in the comments. In Proverbs 13:1, the New King James Version says, a wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. In the New American Standard Bible, it says, a wise son accepts his father's discipline, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. So as I look at these two, I really like the word, even though these are supplied words that we're comparing, it says heeds his father's instruction in the New King James, as opposed to accepts his father's discipline. So that's a real minor difference, but I just love that word heed. I think it sounds good, and actually I really like the meaning of that there. So if you look at these two, again, it's not really about saying one is better than the other. I just think that for me, the New King James tends to sound a little better. I like the word heed there as opposed to accept, although both words are acceptable. They're fine. But I would say for me, I just love that wording, heeds his father's instruction. Let's look at another. This is a classic passage, especially in the King James Version, the wording of this, and the New King James really picks up on it. In 1 John 3:1, behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called the children of God. And then in the New American Standard, it says, see how great a love the Father has bestowed on us, that we would be called children of God. There is a little textual difference there right after that. But when you look at that first phrase there, that is so classic in the New King James, behold what manner of love the Father. Literally, it says in the New American Standard, what kind of love? So what manner of love is a pretty literal rendering, it looks like. The New American Standard, I think, does get the meaning across here. See how great a love the Father has bestowed on us. So they're really similar, but it's that first word there, behold versus see. And as you can see, the New King James Version retains that more traditional wording, behold, what manner of love. Now, is one better than the other? Absolutely not. But I think you can see that for me, the New King James Version just has that more traditional, aesthetically pleasing sound to it, and I really like that. So for public reading and just for hearing it, I love the New King James Version a lot. But again, for study, for technical accuracy, I think there's a lot in the New American Standard Bible that's really good. And I would say generally for the average reader, the New American Standard Bible is worded in a way that many people find more understandable than the New King James Version. Now, some of the differences get back to what I've been talking about lately between the Textus Receptus basis, which is what you have for the New King James, versus the critical text basis of the New Testament, which is what you have for the New American Standard Bible. And people are going to have different opinions on that. But as I've said before, I think using both kinds of translations is really good. So I think both of these translations are great to have and to be able to compare. And again, for me, my preference would be to use the New King James Version because of its beauty and using it in those public settings and reading out loud. And then the New American Standard Bible is just great to be able to have as a reference for personal use and study. So those are my thoughts. I'd like to hear what you think about this. I know some of you have really strong opinions about certain translations, and that's okay. Just try to keep the comments positive and edifying. And as always, thank you so much for listening to what I have to say from A Frisch Perspective.